When I went to seminary to study the Bible, I was very confident I knew the Bible very well. I just went to seminary because I needed a degree. Without a degree, especially if you're working in Canadian American churches, they won't let you preach. You need to have credential. So I knew exactly, I knew about this. I didn't know anything. But then I did my master's program. I got confused. Oh, I thought I knew some of this, but I don't think I know this. So then I studied more and studied more. I finally did my PhD. It's kind of the terminal degree. Now you can't study anymore. That's it. There is no more degree. And now at the end of it, I've come to a point that I have no idea what God is doing. I have no idea. It's just complete blank. And sometimes I completely blank out the way that the Lord is operating in this world. Not specifically about me. It's funny, I was having a conversation with Dr. John, just now, and he was asking, what are you preaching today, Mathew? So he was just asking me, he wanted to get a trailer. I said, this is what I'm preaching. This is my note. So this is like I showed him, this is the blank, I've come to this has become my mental posture because I don't know. I don't know what God is doing anymore. That was, by the way, a joke because I have a couple other sheets, by the way, on this. Yeah. I didn't show it to you. Don't worry. Don't worry. I just didn't. Anyway, so I'm just sharing this to keep this in your prayers. And when God is on the move, or sometimes it is spellbinding, the way all you need is just to float, right? You don't have to do anything, just float. And my problem personally is that I don't know how to float. I'm always a doer, and quite often that is my problem, right? Like, sometimes when God asks you not, like Rijo was praying, right? Like the difference between Martha and Mary is that Martha is a doer. I always consider myself as a Martha, but sometimes all you need to do is nothing. It's difficult to do nothing. Do you know that? It's very difficult to do nothing. But sometimes all you have to do is nothing. I'm going to read a very popular passage for a very short meditation, I hope. This comes from Genesis 13, verses 8 and 9. Genesis 13, verses 8 and 9. So Abraham said to Lot, "Please let there be no strife between you and me, nor between my herdsmen and your herdsmen, for we are brothers. Is not the whole land before you? Please separate from me. If to the left, then I will go to the right, or if to the right, then I will go to the left." And you know this verse, right? This is one of the very popular, the early decision-making process that we see in the Bible. Interesting, as Walson Uncle mentioned, the election in India just happened. And generally people think, and particularly from a Christian perspective, it's a very, very bad decision-making process that happened. People are still trying to make sense of what was happening and all that. But history is full of bad choices, Even our own life history, That's what kind of drives history in some way. Bad choices after bad choices. Depending upon your political conviction anyway. But even in the book of Genesis, right? The bad choices starts from chapter 2, right? Chapter 2. Then the human beings take that bad choice. So as a pastor, if you ask me, what is the question that you get the most from people, right? And you always get questions from the people. And the question I get the most from people, not only me, I'm pretty sure any pastor would say that, people always ask you, how do I know the will of God, right? How do I make a decision? I'm at a, kind of a crossroad. How do I make the decision? How do I know the will of God? And they're asking basically to give them a formula, right? They're asking to give them a formula so that they can apply it and they will know exactly what the will of God is, how to figure out the will of God. And John Stott, I don't know how many of you know him, is probably one of the greatest missiologists, we call him, a theologian, missionary, amazing, and particularly had a very close heart for India and the other majority world countries. And John Stott had an example. When people ask him, how do I figure out the will of God? So John Stott will ask them, okay, I'll tell you in a bit, but can you tell me what I'm thinking? So people say, what? Yeah, tell me what I'm thinking right now. They said, no, how do we know that what you are thinking? Like he said, if you don't know what I am thinking, how do you know that what God is thinking? Because the will of God is a manifestation of the mind of God, right? The will of God is essentially what is the thinking of God, right? So if you don't have enough comprehension to understand what John Stott is thinking, who is sitting right next to you, what in the world makes you think that you can figure it out that somehow through a formula that what God is doing, right? Like in what the will of God is, right? So we have to always come to that with the humility to know the will of God. We have to know the mind of God, right? We have to know the mind of God. Again, there is a verse in the Bible which says we have to have the mind of Christ. Now that is used in a completely different, it doesn't mean that we will have the same comprehension of Christ. It means that we have to have the attitude of Christ, right? We will never have the mind, which is the infinite mind of God, Christ, as you probably know, right? But it really means that we will be able to look at things the way Jesus is looking at, right? How do we interpret the language of God? That's what Jesus knew, right? If you want to know, back in the days when I was in engineering and I was in electrical, but, we had to do some civil engineering too. So, when you study civil engineering, you read a lot of blueprints, right? Like, when you build buildings or, house or something, there will be blueprints. And now you cannot just look at a picture or a blueprint and just look at it like a painting, right? People paint, you look at a poster, you look at a painting, but that's not the way you look at a blueprint, a plan of a building. For that, you need to learn a certain language. You need to learn a language. It's a different communication process, even though it is also a drawing, right? So what the mind of Christ gives us is a language, a communication method in which we will be able to interpret the thinking of God. Anyway, since I have already disappointed you saying that there is no way I'm going to answer that question, because if John Stott couldn't answer, who am I? I'm not going to answer it. But the reason I gave that as an introduction is this story, as we all know, right? Abraham and Lot were together. They were traveling together. Lot was way younger than Abraham. Lot was a nephew of sort of Abraham. And, Lot was inducted into the journey. Lot was never called into the journey. The one who was called was Abraham. He was the senior pastor. And then he brought Lot into this, as an assistant or associate. And they were traveling together. And as you know, the Sunday school story, there came a point in which they had to separate. They had to go in two ways, in a good way. Sometimes it is important to part. It's good for both of them, and it's good for the whole thing. And at that stage, interesting, and when they had to make that decision, what Abraham did is a little strange, don't you think so? Because Abraham is saying to Lot, is not the whole land before you? Please separate from me. If to the left, then I will go to the right, or to the right, and then I will go to the left. Now, Abraham is giving the option to choose to Lot. Do you think that's fair? Do you think that is wise? First of all, what if Lot chose Canaan? What if Lot chose Canaan? Then Abraham would have ended up in Sodom and Gomorrah, right? And Abraham had every single right to take that decision. Nobody in the world will question Abraham for saying that, okay, we have to part, Lord, so this is what I'm going to do. I am going to the right, you go to the left. Or he would say, I am going to the left, you go to the right. And there's no problem. Nobody is going to question anything. But Abraham said, I am not going to take this decision, and I'm going to let you take the decision, right? So Joanne was asking me, what are you going to preach about? What is the title of your sermon? I'm like, I don't have a title. Then I came up with the title I said, the title is Indecision Making. We talk about decision making. What we are seeing in this passage is not decision making from Abraham. It is actually kind of an indecision making. He's not taking a decision. That is his decision. And if you ask me, that doesn't make any sense. I don't think Abraham did the right thing. But that's me. But Abraham chose not to take a decision and pass down the responsibility to Lot at a detriment of everything could have collapsed. Because if Abraham didn't go to, what happened, right? Lot looked at the valley near Jordan, and he found that is well watered. It is well watered, and he chose the valley of Jordan. And so Abraham ended up in Canaan, which is now called the Promised Land, right? That's Jerusalem we are talking about. This place. If Lot took a different decision, the history of the world would have been different. The Promised Land would not have been, Jerusalem. Because that's what is happening. It's a big critical decision. It's a critical decision which drives the entire narrative of the Bible and the narrative of the history throughout to this day. Yet, Abraham chose not to take that decision. Indecision making, right? Obviously, Abraham might have thought, this is a very interesting passage I'm still trying to figure out. But sometimes God gives us certain choices in our life, which is in a natural realm, right thing to choose, okay? What I mean is, so if you go to engineering college, you study engineering, and you graduate from an engineering college, you get out, and then you get a job from IBM, right? Or Microsoft or Google. You don't have to fast and pray about, should I choose that job? Yeah, because that's what you studied, and that's what you got the job, right? In the same way, you go to medical college, and then, after you finish, you get an offer from Kaiser Permanente, then you don't worry about it. You don't even think about that, right? But if you come from medical college and then you get an offer from Google, then you have to worry. Man, that doesn't really fit, right? I don't know what Google is going to do with medical. I don't know. I'm just saying. What I'm saying is, sometimes, this is a tricky part. This is what like I said, some of the things I have learned from God. Sometimes the natural decisions we take can be a test from God. Because the obvious can be also dangerous. The obvious choices can also be dangerous. Because that's what happened to Lot. That's what I would have chosen at that time. If I were Lot, I looked around. Yeah, I am a herdsman. I have sheep and I have to cultivate. That's what I do. That's the only job at the time had. I got the first pig, looked around. There is a river, well-watered valley near that. Hey, obvious choice. Obvious choice. The right decision was made by Lot. In the natural realm. And I believe, I don't know about, but if Abraham was taken that option, he would have chosen because it's a natural decision. There was nothing wrong with Lot's decision. And we now know his decision was wrong because in hindsight, now we know the whole story, what happened. But at that time, who am I to blame Lot? I would have picked exactly the same thing. And probably Abraham would have done that too. So, Lot ended up going east and ended up in Sodom Gomorrah, and because he saw a river, right? River is all about. But he did not know, if you go to the west, you're not just going to find a river, there is a sea. The Mediterranean Sea is in the west. I don't know, so many of you have been to the Holy Land, right? On the one side of the Holy Land, which is the Israel, is Jordan, River Jordan on the east side. And on the west side is what? It is the Mediterranean Sea, I think, right? Like there is a sea there, right? So that was not obvious. That was not clear. That was not physical. But God orchestrated that decision in such a way that Abraham got something beyond obvious. See, this is why it always scares me when, if God gives me a decision between good and bad, it's okay. I know whether I should go to church or not going to church. It's a very obvious choice. Yeah, I should go to church. There's no doubt about that. If I'm not going to church, there's something wrong with me, right? But sometimes the choice can be so true. It's not your no choice, taking the choice between good and bad. It is kind of between good and good. I was reading Oswald Chambers, My Utmost for His Highest, and day before yesterday, there was a quote from his meditation. He says, the worst enemy of faith is not sin, but the good that is not good enough. I like that. He said, the worst enemy of faith is not sin. Because we know how to avoid sin. We are not sinners in that way. We are not somebody who indulges in sin intentionally. But the problem, though, the worst enemy of faith is not sin, but the good that is not good enough. A river is not a sea. Jordan is not the Mediterranean. And the well-watered valley is not the promised land. And this is the problem when we choose between the obvious and the spiritual. So Abraham had this gift, I would say, to turn even the very physical decisions into a spiritual decision. He reverted back to God. So if Abraham came out from engineering college and if he got an offer from Google, he would have still reverted to God. God, should I take it? Or I don't know, I'm just going to float. That's the poise, that's the mental position in which Abraham is operating. That's a very, very, very interesting thing about Abraham. See, this is why when we read further, eventually, you know what happened to Sodom and Gomorrah, right? Sodom and Gomorrah was destroyed by God. God decided to destroy Sodom and Gomorrah. So that was the will of God. God decided, I'm going to destroy this. And God, somehow, he wanted to reveal this. And he had two people to reveal this. One is Lot, who lives in Sodom and Gomorrah. And Lot was not a bad guy, right? You know, Lot was the righteous man. Lot was a righteous man. And then Abraham lives somewhere else. He's not even living somewhere else. He's just wandering around. So, if I am God, what would I do? If I wanted to tell something that is going to happen in Rancho Cucamonga, and I have two options. I can say that either to somebody who lives in Rancho Cucamonga or somebody who lives in Santa Monica or further, somewhere else. But it's interesting that God did not reveal what is going to happen to Sodom and Gomorrah to Lot, who lives in Sodom and Gomorrah. Instead, he took this roundabout way. He went and disclosed that to Abraham, and the poor Abraham had to go and, all the negotiation happening and all that. Why? Why? Lot was not a bad guy. Lot was a righteous man. God wanted to deliver Lot, and God did deliver Lot. Why the will of God was not revealed to Lot? The answer is simple. The will of God is revealed only to a friend of God. Abraham is a friend. See, being a righteous man is not good enough. We are obsessed with this idea of being righteous, right? Do the right thing. Be the right, the right kind of Christian. going to church and paying our tithe and reading our Bible and doing the prayer and everything. We do everything by the letter. We want to perform. We want to do things in such a way that we can all be righteous. But that's not the point. Yeah, that's great. You will go to heaven. You will go to heaven, no problem. This is not about salvation or anything. But to know the will of God, you have to be a friend of God. If you are a friend of God, God cannot wait to disclose His will. Sometimes I think, why should God disclose His will after all? I mean, if I'm God, I want to destroy some place, I'll just go and destroy it. I don't want to disclose my will to somebody else. It's my prerogative, right? I'm going to keep it. But God really wants to disclose His will to all of us. But the question is, what kind of a person am I? What kind of a person am I? Am I a righteous person or am I a friend of God? I'm not a bad guy. I'm not a bad guy. I may not be the best guy in the room, but I know I am not a bad guy. But am I a righteous man or am I a friend of God? That's the key to finding the will of God or knowing the will of God, being a friend of God. That's why Abraham had that posture of he didn't care. It's not like he was being careless, but he was carefree. He was carefree because he knows he's a friend of God. If he ended up in Sodom and Gomorrah, he knows that he is such a friend with God, God will make Sodom and Gomorrah the promised land. Doesn't matter. Doesn't matter where I go because God is going to turn that place into the promised land and God might have destroyed Jerusalem. Who cares? Because when you are in friendship with God, you operate not on a common sense realm, not on a natural realm, but in a spiritual realm, in a transcendent realm. You have a different connection with God because you are a friend of God. And a friend, so how do we become friend of God? The answer is very simple. How do we become friend with somebody anyway? How do you become, what do friends do? Yeah, exactly. Friends spend time together. That's what it is. There's nothing, no magical formula to creating friendship. Friends spend time together. That's all we do. When you spend time together with another person, then you will automatically know what your friends want. What does that person want, right? That's why, as opposed to what Paul said, I always think that people should get married, Paul said it's better not to get married. The thing is, when you get married, you will automatically, this is a good test of every birthdays or every Valentine's Day, which we don't celebrate, or anniversaries. And how do we know what your spouse wants? There is no formula. It's not written. There is no, even though we all speak the same language, you and your spouse speaks the same language, the more you spend time with your spouse, it automatically emerges out of the relationship. There is no point in time I sit and try to figure out what is the will of Joanne. Let me try to calculate this. What is the formula? I call a couple of other guys who are senior than me. How do you find the will of your wife? And then put it all in an Excel sheet and figure it out. That's not how it happens. It just emerges. It doesn't have, it just comes naturally, right? The spending time with the person, with God is what it is. The presence of God. We need to practice the presence of God, not when we just pray, not when we read the Bible, on a continuous, ceaseless basis. Right? See, that's why when Jesus said, you have to become like children, what does he really mean? Have you ever noticed children? Children don't do things to please other people or, that's not, the children don't do things, the children just are. They just do what they do. They never think, okay, let me try to figure out what my dad is going to like. When they grow up, that's what eventually happened to all of us, right? But when they are real little children, they just don't do things. They just are. They are just kids. They just do what just comes to them, right? It's natural. It's automatic. We may like it. We may not like it. It doesn't matter to them. They are not performing for an audience. It just they do it by instinct. That's what the nature does. The son doesn't think, should I go today should I rise today in the east or the west? Because I'm tired of rising in the east every day. Why don't I go to the west? No, sun just rises in the east. River just flows. Birds just sing. They don't think about this. This is called the age of innocence. We were in the Garden of Eden because the will of God was in an instinctual level. We didn't need intellect to figure it out. We did it by instinct. We knew it by instinct. And that's what happens when we become the friends of God. When we spend time with God, that is the magic that happens. There is this verse where Moses, another friend of God per se, the person who spent face-to-face time in a way, that's the way it is mentioned in the Bible. So Exodus 33:13, Moses goes to God and says this. Now, if I have found favor in your sight, show me your ways. Show me your ways. Same thing, same question. Show me your ways, which means explain to me the will of God. What it is you're trying to do. So that I may know you and find favor in your sight. Consider to this nation is your people. He said, this is God's answer. God's answer is very simple. I was hoping that God is going to give him a great answer with a neatly put XYZ formula and everything. But God said, I'm going to answer this way, Moses. He said, my presence will go with you and I will give you rest. That's it. That's it. No formula, no equation. The only thing, because you wanted to know my will, because you wanted to know the way in which I operate, I am going to grant your prayer, an answer to your request by giving you my presence. I'm going to spend time with you. But that's not what we want, right? What we want is a second opinion. You go to the doctor and doctor says you have to do this. Then we say, I don't know. I want to get a second opinion. Because very often when we know the will of God, we almost always know what to do, but we just want to get a second opinion. I don't know about you. That's the way I am very often. God, just want to make sure that I'm doing the right thing because I already know what I'm doing, right? I already know what I should be doing because I can't figure it out. I'm a smart guy. But God says, there is no such formula I'm going to give you. I'm blessing you with my presence. See, the best way to know, the people like Abraham who are friends of God, who are excellent in decision-making or indecision-making, whatever you say it. They always end up at the right place at the right time because they waive their right to choose. They waive their right to choose in an absolute obedience and trust, a childlike trust to God. That's why they become successful decision-makers through their indecision-making. See, in my experience, very often people who come to me and asking these questions, how do we find the will of God? Let's go to a prophet. I know there's somebody in Kerala, somebody there. That prophet says exactly the will of God. So let's make a call. And there is an internet, if you go to, there are sites where you pay just $10. They will pray for you and they will send you a prophecy. They will tell you by internet, $10. That's all it costs. People people go because they want to find the will of God. But if you really ask me, like I said, in the presence of God, if you practice the presence of God, the best way to know the will of God is just to live in it. Abraham didn't have to know the will of God because he always lived in the will of God. See, when you drive in highway, you take a big trip to Portland or Arizona, wherever you're going to go. The moment you get into your highway, you normally turn off your GPS, right? Unless you want to, it suck all your battery power. Because once you are in the highway, you don't have to look at the GPS because you know where it is going. There is a natural process. But the moment you get out of the highway, Maybe to go to McDonald's, maybe to buy something. The moment you get out of highway, then you have to look at GPS. Then the lady is getting angry at you, and then you are trying to take this way and sometimes that way, and you get all confused. Back in the days, we had to really stop and ask how to get back to the highway. But those who drive in the highway doesn't care about GPS. They don't care about the will of GPS, where they are being directed, because they are in highway. And Abraham always was on a highway. He lived in the will of God. He drove in a highway. He didn't have to worry about what is the will of God on this, on that, on this. Abraham said, I'm carefree. Lord, if you want to go this way, go that way, I'll go here. If you want to go this way, go that way, I'll go here. I don't care, because I'm on a cruise. What do you call cruise control, right? Like the drive. Yeah, I'm just driving. I'm chilling. I'm chilling on a highway. I don't care about the way, because I am on a highway of the will of God. Now that is a great lesson I learned from Abraham. And to be in the will of God, to live in the will of God, instead of trying to find the will of God, so that the will of God will become a natural instinct for us, the way we operate. When you are in close proximity to Him all the time, when you live in His presence, when you practice His presence all the time in our life, doesn't matter what we do. One last thing. For us to manifest that will of God by instinct, for us to drive it, the problem though, I didn't give you the painful part of it. It sounded very nice, sounded very interesting. Yeah, that sounds easy, right? Sounds easy. See, the problem is, how do I say that? Okay, when most of us are parents, right? And some of you are going to be parents at some point, or you're watched parents. When you bring little children, Bindu, take this lessons, take your note, and when you bring up little children, one of the toughest thing as parents to do is to what we call break the will of your children. Does that make sense? It sounds bad. But because the children, as I said, they start as very sweet and nice. Like I said, they do everything by instinct. They're natural. They're kids. And, we just laugh and we enjoy. But then they grow up. They grow up 2, 3, 4. The more they grow up, they develop their own will. In the beginning, they are like Abraham, right? They are just on cruise control. They don't care. They have no care in the world. But eventually, they form their own personality. They learn, as you probably know, that's one of the first words the kids learn to know. No. They said no to you, which really means that it is not your will, daddy, mommy. It is my will. It is my will. No. No to your will. Yeah. So then we have to do what we call break the will of kids. That's why the kids throw temper tantrum, and they start this fussing and they're crying, and as parents you want to go and hug them. You really want to give them whatever they want. Sometimes their requests are genuine, but you still don't want to give it. You're still holding on to it. And now parents can relate to this, because you want to break the will of the child. That's exactly the term we use. We had to break their will. Because only when you break their will, your will be manifested through them. Does that make sense? I know it sounds bad, but as parents, your idea, you think you know better for this child. And in most cases, you do. You do. Because you don't want this child to live according to his or her will. You want to live that child according to your will. Because you are the dad. You are the mom, right? Right? That I'm confessing. I want my children to live exactly like what I want. So I want my will to manifest through their will, and so I want to break their will. All parents at some point has done it. If you haven't done it, your child is the spoiled kid I don't want to be around. Because you have to break their will at some point, right? You have to break the reason, the point I'm trying to make is, it kind of sounds fun, but I'm going to reverse it. This is exactly what God has to do as a parent sometime, right? God has to break our will. Now, we are not in the side of the parents. Now we are the children. We are the children. For God to manifest His will through me, He has to break my will. And that is a painful process, I'm telling you. You have no idea how many temper tantrum I have thrown in front of God? How many words inappropriately have you used in my prayer to God? How much time I angry and walked out of God, just like a kid throwing a temper tantrum, and God is looking at me, and Matthew, I'm sorry. I want to give you what you want, but first I need to break your will. Because unless I break your will, my will cannot be manifested through you. Abraham's will was broken in the worst possible way when he was asked to sacrifice his child. And I preached that about in my last sermon. Now that's the place you don't want to be. That's the place we don't think about when we say Abraham, it's nice and all the nice things you hear. But he had to go through the worst possible breaking of will for God to manifest his will through us. Watchman Nee, one of my favorite authors, says this, he has this idea of looking at human beings as inner man and outer man. Like we have an outer man and we have an inner man. It's just like the same terminology Paul used, our inner man. So he says the inner man is, inner man is composed of three different attributes. One is mind, emotion, and mind, emotion, and will. Mind, emotion, and will, right? For example, when you want to do something, if you are asked to do something you like, okay, if you are asked to do something you like, yet you don't understand, you will still do it, right? Because you have the willpower to do that thing, even though you don't understand, because you like it. It appeals to your emotion, even though it doesn't appeal to your mind. Your will is for it. Does that make sense? Now, sometimes if you're asked to do certain things, you understand why it is to be done, but you don't like to do that anyway, but you will still do it if you have willpower, because you know why it is to be done, right? Because it appeals to your mind, but it doesn't appeal to your emotion. Doesn't matter. You will still have the will to do that. But now, for God to break our will, he will ask us to do certain things which does not make any sense to us, which we also do not like. Which means, which does not appeal to our emotions, neither does it appeal to our mind. Now that is the worst kind of mundane position you can be. God, why are you asking me to do that? I don't want to do it. I don't like it. I don't understand why I should be doing it. But at that point, that's where the will of God, is going to be manifested through you, because he is breaking you. He is breaking you through this mundane thing. And I was watching a movie last night. I'm going to tell you that, and I'm going to done with it. It's a 1984 movie, and I can't believe that I waited so long to watch it. It's called The Karate Kid. Some of you might have watched Karate Kid, yeah. So in the story, there's this little boy, and he wants to learn karate. And he goes to his instructor. He's a Japanese, Chinese man. And he said, I will teach you karate. And the boy goes and, he wanted to learn karate. And there's a tournament set, and he has to compete in that tournament. He has to win that tournament because a girl he likes is going to be there. So the result of that really matters. And also, if he loses that tournament, the other guys are going to beat him up. So the tension is mounting, and the tournament day is coming, and he wants to learn karate really fast. And he goes to the master, and the master, first assignment the master gives is, he has a lot of old cars in his garage. He said, go and wax my car, right? So he gives this, cloth and say, with right hand, you wax it right way, and, wax in, wax out. Wax in, wax out. Yeah, some of you have seen the movie. So he does that, and he say, okay, he asked, he had to teach me. I have nobody else. So then he said, okay, next day he goes, finally, I've done that. So master, what should I do? Then he said, now today you have to sand the floor. Okay, so he had to sand the floor. So he had to, kneel and sand the floor with both his hands, right? And then the third day, the next time he goes, he said, now you have to paint the fence. You have to paint the fence. And, to paint the fence up, down, like this. You use your wrist and up and down. And then the boy is kind of going crazy now. Like, I want to learn karate. And I have a competition coming. Master, are you really exploiting me? Are you treating me like your slave? That's what the boy is doing, because he's doing the most mundane thing possibly. It doesn't appeal to his emotion, doesn't appeal to his mind. It is something he doesn't, it is not something he likes. It is not something he wants to do. Then the master says, the last day he says, now you have to paint the wall. Like, when the fence was up and down, now you had to paint the wall like left and right. I think now you got the point of the story. Then at the final day, he says, now you learn karate. Then he does the move, then the boy automatically reflects, because all these things he was doing was actually part of the karate movement he was learning. Walks in, walks out, paint the fence, up and down, paint the wall, left and right. All these things were actually, he thought was mundane. It didn't mean anything to him, but finally the boy goes and wins the competition, gets the girl. Happy ending to the story. The point I'm trying to make is, sometimes we want to learn karate. Sometimes all we want to do is to win the tournament. Sometimes all we want to do is to get the girl. That's all we want to do. But God says, sand the floor. Walks in, walks out. Paint left and right. God says, doesn't make any sense. I'm quitting. I'm tired, I'm done. And Abraham never did. That's why his will was broken. At that brokenness, God's will was manifested. So if God is breaking your will, and I know this, I've gone through this, my own story, this is my own story, this is not just Abraham's story, this is all our story. I know some of you are fellow pilgrims with me. If God is breaking your will, if God is asking you to do something very mundane, something you don't appreciate, something you don't want to do, and I'm telling you, you are at a good place. You're at a good place. You're learning all the right move. Because at the time comes, God is going to put you in his bow and deploy like an arrow, and you will go and hit exactly where you are going to hit. So don't try to figure out. Don't try to find what is happening to me, why it is happening to me. Go to God with this empty sheet. Lord, I have no clue, but I'm going to trust you. I don't care about the decision. I don't care about my will, so that I can say like Jesus said, it is not my will, Daddy. It's your will that matters. At that point, your will is broken. At that point, God's will is going to be manifested in your life.